Because it, yeah. Okay, great. You can continue.
Yeah, so yeah, that's kind of my sort of spiel is that authenticity really matters to me as a curator and an editor, and also looking for images and looking for artists that are not simply replicating what we see over and over and over again. And yeah, seeing kind of like the departures from a lot of fashion photography or a lot of things that are like figurative. Those were the things that were exciting for me and wonderful for me. And I wanted to choose a group of artists that spoke to each other in certain ways so that when people walked in, they would see an exhibition where there was a conversation being had. And I felt like that conversation was, again, like one of authenticity, you know, a group of artists that knew the topics that they were working on very well and very intimately. So, yeah, that was my kind of modus operandi or my thinking around um, curating the show.
So before we move into the artists discussing their work, can you talk a little bit about exactly what you do at Aperture, like what your day-to-day life there is?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. So I do a lot of things. I am an editor in the books department. So for me, it's a combination of working with artists on um, essentially all the nuts and bolts of making a book. So most of the time, artists come with a pre kind of selected work that they or works that they want to put into a book. And Aperture is very well known. We do thematic books, but we also do, we're also really well known for doing monographs and supporting artists' first books. So the nuts and bolts day kind of looks like for me, having a body of work from an artist and then working with that artist to turn that into a book. So looking for a proper designer that matches that artist aesthetic. Looking also for writers that would be appropriate to determine or to I should say to describe that artist's work. So for me, I build relationships with artists and I also build relationships with writers. And then we move the book through kind of full production, choosing paper, choosing binding, you know, because Aperture is you know your favorite photographer's uh, book publisher. You know, it's a publisher that prides itself on creating books and creating objects that are not just a vehicle for the images, but that are also an object in and of itself. So something that you know you can keep on that shelf, something that is beautiful and something that really elevates a photographer's work. So that's like one part. And then the other part is that I contribute to the magazine and also the digital platform. And so there, I do some writing, but I also am always like looking for writers and even looking for artists that may be able to write about other artists' work. So it's my job is to kind of like create an ecosystem of ideas about photography and connect audiences to photography through the books, through the magazine, and then also through the digital platform. So that's kind of that's what my job is. It's a lot of things.
Do you work at the offices there in New York at the Aperture Museum?
I do. So Aperture has an office in Chelsea, and we all work out of the office. But the editors are often in sort of different places, also scouting, also trying to be connected and going to a lot of different events. For example, like we just had APAD, which is like a sort of event that is a big show of photography. And a lot of galleries come to it, and the editors will go to that show and just kind of look and see, you know, what is happening in photography. So we work out of New York, but we're also kind of always traveling and um, going to different fairs or going to openings or shows. in different places, just to be connected with photography, not just in New York, but also all over the United States and also internationally too.
Right. Yeah, during art fair last year, you guys had a pop up here that was fantastic. Yeah, and a lot of great books for sale also. So yeah.
Yes, yes. Aperture is known for their amazing pop-ups at fairs. Definitely, definitely. We just actually released the shortlist for the Aperture Portfolio Prize. So we haven't announced the winner yet, but the shortlist is out. So I definitely encourage you all to take a look at that and also consider that call. Um, and yeah, we're really excited about it. And the pop-up that we just did at APAD also showed the Aperture Portfolio Prize shortlist as well.
Oh, nice. Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to move us into the next portion of the evening. So let me start sharing again. Okay. So Portfolio 2025. And I just want to say before we get started, every year Portfolio is a very, very interesting exhibition for us, whereas most of our exhibitions, except for the solo shows, usually feature about 30 artists. So this one is very unusual in that it only features 8 artists, each one showing 6 works. And so um, each year the exhibition has a very, very distinct personality. Um, and the the works that you selected and put together has just been really, really successful this year. Um, we're getting a lot of foot traffic of people coming in to take a look at it. People are really, really intrigued. You know, um, it's interesting to see people that normally would come in and perhaps maybe not know how to discuss the photography or know how to interact with it because it might be a bit academic, are really, really responding to the works and also talking about the works in relationship to each other. And so the really been loving the feedback, and the show is just really excellent. It's really nice to be in the gallery each day with it and be spending time with the images. So thank you for your work on the show and the images that you selected.
Thank you very much. That's fantastic to hear.
So these were the people that were selected this year, and each one of them are going to be discussing their body of work. We're going to go in the order that you see here, which is basically by the first name. And so with that, we're going to start with Elena Lurie. And Elena, I'm just going to kind of work my way back and forth through your images while you're talking. So please take the floor.
Okay, thank you, David. Hi, my name is Elena Lurie. I'm a 21-year-old photographer and artist from Atlanta, Georgia. I go to school in Baltimore. I go to the Maryland Institute College of Art, where I'm also studying photography. And I've been practicing for about 5 years now. But more specifically about this body of work, I was thinking about body examination, especially in relation to Black womanhood. A lot of my work encompasses me talking about my experiences through Black womanhood, but I was finding it very difficult to talk about necessarily the joys that I find within my identity without bringing light to the plights um, in my identity. So I was thinking a lot about body examination, and I was thinking about the origins of colonialism and how that aided in hypersexualization of Black women. I was thinking about Sarah Bartman more specifically. She was an enslaved woman in the 18th century, and during this time, human zoos were very prevalent. So these women or enslaved individuals were put in cages and they were chained and they were beaten and they were exploited. And I was thinking about how that was kind of a form of pageantry. And I related that to modern day pageantry. And even though the women in these pageants are subjected to chains and cages, there's still that level of body examination, and we still see the remnants of racism and misogyny and sexism and colorism and all these isms that impact my identity and my experience as a Black woman. So it felt very directly tied. I did some deeper research into the lineage of pageantry and of human zoos, and they're very closely linked, especially when we're talking about like the World's Fair and all of these other heinous things that happened in relationship to the Black body. So thinking about this, I began to consider sorry. So thinking about this, I began to consider the new appropriations of the Black body and how through like plastic surgery and like music culture and all these other things, the Black body has been appropriated. So by using this breastplate, it's my way of mocking Eurocentricity and Eurocentric beauty standards and kind of repossessing my body and poking fun at whiteness in this way, basically. And yeah, that's a lot of what my work is doing. I'm inspired by the works of Dina Lawson, Nadia Lee Cohen, Nikki S. Lee. And through that research, I was able to channel this breadth of knowledge to create this project.
Great. So,
I would just say too, I see a little bit of Zanele Mohole in there too.
yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Thank you so much.
So
Oh,
at the end of
sorry.
at the end of tonight's presentation, we're going to have like kind of a general Q&A. But since there's only 8 artists tonight, if anybody that's on the call has any specific questions they would like to ask Elena, feel free. And I'd like to kind of keep things conversational. So, feel free. Janae, if you want to jump in with conversation, please feel free to. And yeah, we can have a nice dialogue about the work.
I meant to mention one of the most important parts of this project is that I'm at the forefront of these images. I'm the pageant queen in like the wig and the Dolly Parton-esque makeup, and I'm the only one really who wears the breastplate. So it's very directly supposed to be linked to like my experience and how being a Black woman has been very, or womanhood in general, but especially being a Black woman, there's a lot of like performative characteristics in my identity.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Yeah. Is I'm assuming that these are images from a larger body of work. That we get to see 6 of these, but you have more. Are these images available on your website to see like the rest of this series?
Not yet, because I'm still in the process of making this body of work. I started
Okay.
last um fall making this. So I just haven't really felt comfortable putting it up just because it isn't resolved yet. But on my Instagram, all of these images are available.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. And for anybody who's interested, if you go to the page on our website at APG about this exhibition, each of the artists are hyperlinked out to their Instagram account. So you can find all of these artists on Instagram. So next, that brings us to Alexander Lawrence. Is it Rubalcaba?
Rubalcaba, yeah.
Thank you. And the
Hi, everybody. So I started making this body of work in the end of 2021. I was raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, known as the Mormon Church. And I left when I was 16. For those of you that are familiar, that doesn't need that much explanation. For those of you that are not, that's a very insular community, and so it's not one that takes departure very well, to put it kind of lightly. And so that caused kind of a pretty drastic schism between me and my family. but the point of this work isn't really to focus on that schism. The point is more to look at the culture as a whole, because as time went on, I found that a lot of the parts of myself that I found to be positive character traits and things that I found beneficial to my character were directly a part of that upbringing, even though I have very strong disagreements theologically and doctrinally, and even culturally. And so I was trying to rectify kind of that difference between uh, things that I could see were clear benefits that I benefited from, and things that I had big disagreements with, and also the kind of discrepancy that the church has within American culture at large, because um, the Mormon church tends to be seen as something very foreign and very strange and very other to the American experience. A lot like a pretty significant portion of American Christians don't consider Mormons to be Christian. A lot of different denominations of American Christianity see them as practicing some kind of other religion, and Mormonism is really at the bedrock of American Christianity. Um, I'm not by any means trying to suggest that everybody should believe in it or trying to convert anybody, but more to say that this is something that's really baked into the culture of the United States, and it's the only really native, homegrown American religion that has kind of blossomed into a global religion that like it or not, has a kind of global standing. And so I've been using in kind of trying to explore that, I've been using my family, both my family as they are now and my family's history, as kind of a proxy to tell the story about the church's culture today and its history, because my family's history maps pretty well onto most of the major events from the late 1840s when the Mormons arrive in Utah onward to the present. And so by using my own family as a proxy for the church, I can kind of tell that story without getting mired in academic argument about kind of granular details. And so yeah, this work is kind of an exercise in that, and the photographs are they take place from Idaho through Utah, Arizona, northern Mexico, California, all places that Mormons settled, founded. These are foundational places in the American West. The Oregon Trail and the California Trail were built on the back of the Mormon Trail. Outposts like San Bernardino and Las Vegas obviously became the major cities that they did today, but those were settled by either Mormon settlers or Mormon battalion members. And it's a part of American history that tends to get kind of pushed to the side or overlooked. And my underlying kind of thesis argument is not trying to convince anybody that they should partake in the faith, but that they should take it seriously as a part of American history, because it is, I think, a pretty good reflection of uh, largely and kind of abstractly speaking what we are historically as a culture, and kind of what we've done over the last 275 years in this kind of big experiment of this country. Um, and yeah, so I mean, the photographs that were chosen, these are a very small segment of the larger body of work, and these will end up being a book that will be part photographic and part academic. Um, Hopefully to be released next year. We're gonna see. We're working on that. Um, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I know that's a lot to throw at people kind of all at once. So I
I
think
love
I'll cut
how
myself up there and then we can go from there.
No, I really love how you describe that, the like, because you feel it in the images without having the full context of this is like expansionist and Western, and I'm from California. So I'm very familiar with Mormonism and the church
Where
and
in California?
Sacramento, actually, big Mormon town.
Okay, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So this is very much like, and I'm obsessed with these kind of interiors and like how they feel. So that part of the reason why I was so interested in this work is because for me, there was something super familiar about this and yet something kind of unexplored. So yeah, it's great work.
Totally. And with the interiors, it's I think because there's two different kinds of Mormon uh architectural structures. There's meeting houses where Sunday worship service would happen like any other church service. And then there's the temples, and the temples get all the attention. Those are the ones that none of you nor me now are allowed to go into because we're not, upstanding members, and they're kind of shrouded in secrecy. But the photographs of the interiors, these are all in Mormon meeting houses. Any one of you could go to a Mormon service on Sunday and see these things. And so I'm kind of trying to put little Easter eggs that, Mormons will be able to resonate with. So while you guys get to explore something unexplored, Mormons will get to see something that is very familiar. So like this one that we're looking at right now, uh, it's clearly a chapel to anybody who's been in anything remotely resembling a Protestant church. This viewpoint would be very, very normal for any member of the church because public speaking is ingrained in the culture because the services are run by the congregation. So the sermons are given by two or three members of the congregation every week. And so this is partially why Mormons tend to be at least relatively comfortable public speakers, is because from the time you're 8 onward, this is a part of Sunday. You, every, 12 to 15 weeks, are expected to get up in front of the congregation and give a small 5-minute talk about some doctrinal principle. And this is exactly what it would look like if you were up there. And in other Protestant denominations, this is something reserved only for the pastor.
Yeah, it's interesting being in the Bible Belt down here. We have a lot of people who've been coming through the gallery who were either are currently Southern Baptist or raised Southern Baptist, and a lot of them have been spending time with your work and talking about how familiar it feels to them. Uh, and so with your explanation, it's like I can see why.
Yeah, it makes a lot
Oh,
of
I'm very
sense.
happy to hear that.
It's kind of goes back to that authenticity that I was bringing up earlier about like why I selected these works, because you can feel the like intimacy of many of them, and that you all as photographers, the topics and the things that you're photographing, and it comes through especially in these particular images.
Yeah, and the images are printed and framed at about 40 inches in height, and so they have like a lot of impact on the wall. In particular, this portrait here is like outstanding. The way it looks on the wall is just really beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us now to Blake Burton.
Hey,
So Blake, you are up.
all right. Thank you, David. Thank you, David, for everything you do for this community and to APG. We really appreciate it. And thank you to Dr. Johnson for taking time out of your schedule to review all the submissions and select the works. It's an honor to be with you, and we're grateful for the time that you've given to this community. So my name is Blake Burton. I'm an architect and photographer here in Atlanta, Georgia. And this is a series called Tombsboro that started about a year and a half ago. And it started kind of with the semblance of a plan, and then just kind of, morphed into something else, like a lot of good things do. And it kind of stemmed from a need to get out of the city of Atlanta. Just with sometimes it feels overwhelming being in a crowded, loud city. And, I was one day just looking for some peace and quiet and started driving east on I-20 and ended up at a small town in Georgia at night where there was just complete silence and just these beautiful old structures. And being an architect, I'm really drawn to, classic architecture and structures that, kind of from a time and a place. And, I started to really notice from that particular visit how peaceful and quiet it was. And so I started to make further visits to other small towns in Georgia and started to build a map of places that I wanted to go to, and, places to visit at a certain period of time, and just kind of wander a little bit and just kind of check out a building that looked interesting on Google Earth, and then just kind of walk the streets. And so I've been, for the past year and a half, visiting dozens and dozens of small towns in rural Georgia. And what I really started to pick up on a pattern was, like the town of Toomsboro, it was kind of a snapshot of a bygone era. A lot of industry that was kind of centered on a railroad, and I really started to notice that pattern. Most of the pieces in this body of work are kind of very close to historic railroads in the state of Georgia, and so to me, it kind of stood out as, Toomsboro wasn't just that one singular town, but it was kind of like representative of many of these towns. They were all kind of like that, these sort of, commercial structures that were kind of the heart of these communities back in the day. And right now, they're kind of hovering between, ruin, or maybe there's a new life for them soon. But to me, what stood out, and kind of the focus on seeing them at night in particular, was that it seemed like a lot of these structures were really just kind of silently emerging from a darkness. And that to me was really powerful, just with kind of thinking of these silent structures that have a history that I'm not aware of, and it's not clear what kind of history or what has happened to these buildings or what they've seen, but you can imagine the amount history they have seen. And so I'm continuing to work on this. I have a lot of towns that are in South Georgia that are on my radar that I'm going to venture out to, but really I think it's just kind of leaning into that sort of southern landscape, of kind of a snapshot of a current southern landscape, and this being possibly like a transitional period for some of these towns and these structures, where 20 years from now, this particular image, there might be a very lively restaurant or brewery here or something like that. Hopefully there's new life for it, but for me, it really is kind of a snapshot of this period and this time in history, for these towns. And it for me, I think it's kind of, again, living in a city, going out to these places where it's just peace and quiet. It's just stillness that really just like, is good for my soul. And I think, every time I make these trips, I get more and more excited of what I'm going to find. It's not always the exact specific thing that I'm going to photograph, but there's an idea of something, and then let's just see what comes up. Let's just see what emerges from the darkness as I'm kind of walking around. So, yeah, series is called Toomsboro. There's more on my website and Instagram, and I'll continue to make new work from it.
And I would just say too, just add that there's something, so you said quiet. And when I looked at this series, I was like, this is so quiet. This is so contemplative. This is so beautiful. This is so respectful. And there was something that was like in it that was like an antidote to maybe like the times that we live in. And so I appreciated the images and the aesthetic for that, because it really does, like, yeah, it really is kind of like an antidote to what we have sort of going on, all the chaos, and also even some narratives about ruin and about economic decline. It was like, okay, like you said like maybe these will be a restaurant in 5 years. We don't know that. And so there's something also quite hopeful about it, even as they kind of sit. So, and I thought that this series and this work, as I said about the sort of previous work, it's just this very well, and that authenticity like definitely shines through.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, Blake, I appreciate what you said about it being kind of representational, because like spending time with the images, I mean, anybody who you travel not all that far outside of Atlanta, and like this is what you encounter, all over Georgia.
Right.
But when you sit and look at the images, it's like it could just be anywhere America. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
and
funny. When I went to the framer, they were asking when I picked them up. They're like, "Are these in the Midwest somewhere?" And I'm like, no,
yeah,
all of these state of Georgia, and they were quite surprised by that.
yeah, and a gorgeous color palette too. Yeah, so
Thank you.
All right, and that brings us up next to Dr. Boyce Clark. Uh,
Hi,
and so,
everyone.
Boyce, you are up.
Thank you. Hello. My name is Boyce. I'm a scientist and artist in Athens, Georgia. These images are from a collection that I took as a 19-year-old photography student. I grew up outside of New Orleans and went to the Delta Blues Festival in the center of the state of Mississippi, and got there and was so shocked at the conditions that people were living in. Like, I was kind of gobsmacked about it. I came about a month later and spent a long weekend and took over 800 images. So it's me driving around and walking up and introducing myself to people and asking if I can take their photo. As a chemist, I'm very much drawn to the darkroom practice, my hands in the chemicals, the wetness, the papers. But after a while of once you figure out the exposure on a larger and the aperture, it's really just over and over and repetitive. You're making the same thing over and over again. And that was very not really fulfilling to me. And so for about a decade now, I've been very interested in alternative process, because how you apply the sensitizer, the way the paper is going to react with that, literally everyone is completely unique. You can never replicate these. So these images are ones that I wanted to kind of reimagine onto an unusual substrate. So I curate each one of these newspaper pages to add additional context to the image. So this is a process called the Van Dyke Brown. It's a sensitizer that I spray onto the newsprint, dry it. I scan these images in from the negative. They're 120 millimeter negatives that get scanned in. I then print them on an inkjet printer on transparency paper. The negatives are 24 square inches. They get contact printed onto the newsprint, and then they go into a water bath to be washed and fixed, which you can imagine is like wet toilet paper, for 2 hours that you're trying to handle these things. Van Dyke Brown traditionally prints brick red color that wasn't really that appealing to me, so I toned these in gold to shift it to the colder black, because as fine art photographers, our core tenet is to have things that are archival, right? They're going to last minimally 200 years. Newspapers not going to. So I'm trying to lean into that. These are kind of moments in these people's lives. So the newsprint is also, something that's very transient. Also, as it ages, oxidizes, and yellows, I felt like the black was going to be a much more contrasting and interesting thing as this moves on. I'm completely fascinated by the concept that the paper will degrade and fall away well before the metal and the images do, and that's kind of beautiful to me. There are 13 pieces in this series, or over 800 in the collection the images that I took in Mississippi. Um, I did have a show in Athens last month, and now that I've kind of discovered newsprint, which I'm not aware of other people printing on newsprint as part of the story, but I kind of moved into some other things. I'm using vintage papers from World War II that were put out by the War Department to our soldiers. And at the time, queer people like myself couldn't go to photography studios and get a portrait made with our significant other. So often these soldiers and other queer people would get into photo booths and pull the curtain close and take their image. So Smithsonian's collating large collections of these. I've been taking their images and printing them onto vintage newspapers from 1948 that they very likely would have held, to try and kind of retell their story on something a story that they actually literally may have held that paper. So I feel like my practice is going to be involving with newspaper and substrates for a long time, kind of going forward. As a scientist, it was a lot of back and forth of trying to figure out how to get the best dynamic range, the sharpest quality. It was definitely a lot of my analytical side, trying to lean into my artistic side with these.
that's what immediately stood out for me is just it was really cool to see something so experimental, and like you could see it in the images, and um that I think is rare in photography, and what you've done is not only interesting but also beautiful. So
Thank you.
yeah, for sure, that was like a huge thing to me. And going through all the images, I was like, oh wow, like this is a different level of experimentation. So it's really cool and fascinating to hear you explain it this way.
Thank you so much. And I'm honored to have been selected.
Yeah, the work definitely has people have an emotional reaction to your work that come into the gallery and see it. I've seen people like taking pictures and texting it to their friends saying you need to come see this. And they're really not only connecting with the technique, but the images that you took and the people that you're showing. Did you make the paper that you were printing on? Was there a conscious choice in which, you know, spread of the newspaper and the stories that were on the paper? Did you make a conscious
Yeah,
choice around that?
absolutely. I mean, for this one that you have up now about who let the grown-ups out, this woman on this particular one, and then I think you also have the one of with the rest of her family. I was driving past. Her name is April. Her husband's name is Willie. You can see on his hands in that print that he has vitiligo, is losing pigmentation on his hands. And I took their photo of their family. I don't know if these are their grandchildren or their great-grandchildren, but I returned a month later with a framed copy of the photo of the family to give them as a gift, this one. And I mean, this tiny shotgun shack, I knocked on the door. A woman I did not know answered. And I said, I'm looking for Willie and April. And she said, I don't know who that is. This is a community of 300 people. How do you not know who that is? And I showed her the photo and she said, oh, she's dead and he's missing. And it was just mind blowing, what happened. And just again, the transients that had a big, this was the first image that I ever did on the newspapers. And because of that experience and the story with them, of the transience of both of our lives, as well as what photography does in capturing an image in a split second, I wanted it to be on something that was also pretty transient and not really, archival.
Yeah, the way they're framed and displayed in the gallery is interesting because the frames are all handmade and it's kind of like a little bit of a shadow box kind of effect, but there's no glass or anything between you and the newspaper. So there's like this wonderful kind of textural quality that you get to experience when looking at it.
The materiality was important for me because, as these dried, they shrink in different ways and the paper curls. So I wanted that to be part of the experience in viewing it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So we're moving on here to Doug Da Silva.
Hi,
And hi.
thanks everyone. It's great to see everyone again and to revisit the photos that were up in the gallery. They're up in the gallery now. I want to kind of second Blake's acknowledgement to you, David. Thank you for everything you're doing for the Atlanta photography community in the gallery. And also, Janaea, really appreciate and acknowledge you for the challenge you had in selecting the 8 artists for this exhibition. I know it was pretty daunting, I would imagine. And I really loved your description at the beginning when you said that as you walk in the gallery, you can see a relatedness, a conversation between the images. I really loved that description. So thanks for presencing that for us. I'll give you a little bit of a brief background. I'm originally from San Francisco, born and raised. Lived pretty much my whole life in the Bay Area until 2019 when we moved to Atlanta to be near the grandkids. But in terms of my photography background, as a kid, making trips to Yosemite in the summer, spring and summer was really inspired by Ansel Adams And that's what got me inspired to take up photography. And in terms of my career, I've been in my career in creative services as a creative director, graphic designer for about 30 plus years now. But always been involved with photography on many different levels. So I have a pretty large archive of black and white film photography that I'm working through at the moment. For this particular portfolio, one of the things that has drawn me to to these rusted vehicles and images are the fascination with what Mother Nature has done to these cars, and the way I like to describe it is what she revealed that we didn't know was there, like the hidden beauty of the patina and the decades of exposure to the elements, what gets revealed and unconcealed when these are, along with the light, obviously, has a lot to do with it. And also, one of the things that fascinates me um, is imagining. I kind of let my imagination run wild, thinking about when these first rolled off the assembly line, what they look like, brand new, and who was the first person that bought this car, and what were their family like, and how did this car end up in this field for 30, 40, 50 years? What was the story behind that? So, and perhaps uh, Blake may have a similar interpretation when he looks at some of his old buildings, like that, those buildings were brand spanking new at one point, and who was the first business owner or so forth, like that. So that's really a draw for me, the fascination with the story behind some of these. And just the way that the light plays on these images and the mystery that is there for me. The colors, really the colors are the things that draw me in mostly. You could walk by this particular, or the one that you just had up, David. You can come by an hour later in the same spot and you won't see that. You may just walk by and miss the amazing way that the light plays on the color of these, the paint that's been patinaed, and that's just just endlessly fascinating for me. So yeah, that's I really appreciate, when Janaea, when you selected me, and I really appreciate it. I had seen the other artists. I was kind of curious as to how um, I ended up being selected, but you pretty much described it at the beginning, and I appreciate you filling in that gap for me. So thank you.
Of course.
Did you photograph all these cars at one location, or is this in multiple locations?
Most of these, I've got a pretty huge portfolio of these, but these were in the area up about an hour north of Atlanta. It's called Old Car City. It's a huge. I want to say it's 40 acres. That might be too much, but there's probably about 4,000 cars that this family has been collecting, and people have been taking. It started out as a repair shop, but people just ended up bringing their old vehicles to this huge area, and he just has allowed people over the years to bring their cars there. I don't think he's got the landowner doesn't have anything that's newer than 1970, I believe. So everything's 1970 or older. And some of these vehicles, I've never heard of the brands or the types of vehicles, but um, most importantly, it's for me, it's the way that the light and shadows and the colors, um, it's an endless source of fascination for me.
That's what struck me too, is just the light. And I just had like a visceral reaction, I think, to that. And to this point about not necessarily like the cars, I was like, what kind of car is that? Like, I've never seen that before. It almost gave the impression of being a different world or an alternative world or like a dream world in a way. because I couldn't place the cars. And I thought to myself, is like, do I not know these cars? Because like, why? So I think that was also very appealing to me. This idea of like a different kind of world, like through the looking glass. That's what it felt like to me when I was looking at the aesthetic and like the patina. And so I think that also really spoke to me as well.
Yeah, I call it the lost world. That's my description for it. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Mhm.
And so next up is Eli Craven. We had work from Eli in the Critical Mass show that we hosted here in January. So it was nice to have more of the work in the gallery. So Eli, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I didn't test my mic before, so just testing now. Thank you so much. Well, it's really exciting to hear everybody talk about their work. And a little daunting. I have to speak so clearly and so well. But thank you, David, and thank you, Janaea, for including me. It's like really exciting to be a part of this group. I really relate to so many things being said already. I myself was born and raised in Idaho Falls, Idaho. So come from the Northwest, transplant to the Midwest. I currently live in Lafayette, Indiana, and I teach at Purdue. Um, so I relate to the all the conversation about Latter-day Saints and Mormons. They predominantly occupy Idaho Falls, Idaho, so I grew up around them. I think my childhood really relates to the way I work and the way I treat imagery and like the way I create photography. Um, I was kind of grew up in a poor household. My family was, it was the product of teenage pregnancy, and so it was just decades of struggle trying to like build a life as teenagers with children, and then like kept having more kids, and so I grew up in this time when we didn't have a lot of resources. I was born in 1979, and so in like the 1980s as a kid, access to images was scarce, and if we got to get a magazine at the grocery store or something, it was something really special to me to just like have something to flip through and to look and to touch the photography that was in there. And then when we occasionally got to go see a movie, it was also very special to see a moving picture. And so I became quite obsessed with photography as a young child, not as a photographer, but just as somebody that wanted to study it, touch it, and like look at it over and over again. And especially Idaho Falls in 1980s, it was insular and, I homogenous and awkward, and so seeing what the world was outside, seeing what like New York City looked like through books and magazines and TV seemed like such a window. It was so exciting to see other. And so when I grew up and I was a late start as an artist, I didn't know I wanted to be an artist. I was a little lost. And then in my mid 20s, I went to college and discovered, photography classes as an art form. And um, started with darkroom photography, like a lot of you had talked about the materiality. It really excited me, the materiality. So I'd make a lot of silver gelatin prints and did a lot of RA4 processing color film prints in college, and just handling the material got like led me to collage, which then also led me to like physically making the work. And then worked a lot of odd jobs before I got into education and became a professor. But one of those jobs was um, uh, apprenticing for a woodworker. So I worked for years making tables and chairs and cabinets and custom woodworking, and eventually learning to frame my own work. The scrap material I started to play with the same way I played with collage. And so the frame was integral to the work, and I used the frame to kind of represent photography, a lot of which is vernacular photography that I've saved myself or collected over the years because I love estate sales and I love flea markets and like looking at other people's histories and guessing about what their history was and reinterpreting the unknown through vernacular photography. but I also create my own photographs and plan and stage them and how they're going to be framed and manipulated. And the work's gradually becoming more three-dimensional. You see some of the work in the show, like these, I use these brass panels to kind of jut out from the image and disrupt it and extend it and make it a new viewing experience as you move around. Um, and conceptually, a lot of the work comes from this experience in my childhood, just being kind of this soft spoken, quiet kid that was teased on the playground, but also like growing up not relating to or identifying as religious as a teenager around so many um, Mormon kids, Latter-day Saint kids. Like we have a conversation about Latter-day Saints here, but I felt like an outsider in that effect too. And so as I grew up, I constantly was questioning like my masculinity, um, my male identity as it relates to what I see in imagery and then the magazines I looked at when I was a kid, and then what I was also like chastised for, teased for on the playground, and the kind of masculinity we celebrate versus the masculinity that is real. And so in a lot of my work, I take images that I find to be like utterly banal, but then if you like tease with it or cover a portion, does it instigate desire or does it affect the way we read this scene or this figure as something other? Or to like play with this figure looking back at us, like disrupting the gaze or maybe like provoking a new way of looking. So it often kind of touches on sexuality, desire, and like our relationship to looking and looking back, or the desire to touch and own and see things in general. Yeah, I if I don't stop, I'll just keep going, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, I would just say too that I'm absolutely like I love material and materiality, and I was also super struck by the depth of all of like the interpretations of the work, and I just like want to touch everything. And I think that's like a wonderful and really good thing, especially now. It's like the digital is just I'm very much over it. So I loved this, and this like popped out to me immediately. It's just it's like a deep experience and deep work. So that was I was like instantly like this has to be there because it's a lot. It's work that you can kind of sit with. So appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I actually really
Did he freeze?
Okay, so I was wondering if that was me or if that was him.
oh
No, I think you may have frozen. Uh-oh, I think you froze.
oh yep. Can you hear me?
Okay, there you are. You're
Yep,
back.
we can
Yeah,
hear you.
I got a little notification that my internet connection was unstable for a second there, but I think yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's this seems to be kind of something that keeps coming up in conversations with different artists. Is like a lot of us who maybe didn't grow up in the city or didn't have access and resources of certain things. This our first experiences of photography were in magazines that we were, ending up in our households or that we ran across, and that kind of sparked an interest in the medium, and that probably had some influence. Yeah, as you started working. I have to tell you a funny story. So when your piece arrived for Critical Mass, so the piece that was in Critical Mass that you sent for the people that didn't see it, it was this, it was a photograph of a hand with a finger up, and the finger was bandaged. And then there was a tray at the bottom with this kind of gold, like what you see here, but it was at the bottom. And so it got unpacked, and someone leaned it up against the wall, and I went over to take a look at it. And on the side of the frame was what looked to me like dried blood. And I said, "Oh, this is really interesting." I said, "Not only is it like a bandaged finger, but they like they included blood on the frame. It's like, that's crazy. But then I realized that one of the volunteers had cut themselves while they were unpacking the work. And so we got it all cleaned up and sanitized and everything before it went any further. But at first I thought it was just part of your artistic vision.
No, that's really funny. I'm not too precious about it. It doesn't bother me to hear that. It's really funny. It's a bad omen to have a cut and bandaged finger in the show.
Right. And so next up is Quintavious Oliver. And for those who may not be familiar with Quintavious or aren't from Atlanta here, Quintavious was our first recipient of the Museum of Fine Arts Houston Purchase Award. And they took two of his prints into their permanent collection just about a year and a half ago. And Quintavious is also on our advisory board at APG. So with that, Quintavious, I'm going to turn it over to you.
What's going on, beautiful people? Appreciate the intro, David. Janaea, thank you for selecting my works.
Hey, Quintavious, there is something funky going on with your audio.
Let's see if I can fix it real quick. Can y'all hear me now?
It's like you almost sound digitized, like a it's like a buzzing kind of thing that happens while you're speaking.
I'll change it. Yeah, my wife just texted me and told me I sound like a robot.
I think he's frozen.
Yeah, are you frozen, Quintavious? Or are you? Let's see if he comes back here. Oh, something in chat. I tell you what, we seem to have lost Quintavious momentarily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to the next thing, and then once Quintavious is back, we can circle back around to him. So let me just go ahead and move on to Shujan Zhou. Are you ready to take the floor? Is she? No, she may not. She is not here. Oh, Quintavious is coming back in. It looks like she was unable to make it tonight. So, hey, Quintavious, are you back with us?
I don't know, maybe.
Ah, much better. Yes, great.
Weird.
Yeah, you sound great now. So,
Okay. Not sure what was going on there. As long as you guys can hear me, let me know if it sounds weird. My wife was texting me
No,
telling
no.
me I sound like a robot.
Yeah, you did. You sound like a robot, but now you sound perfect. So,
Cool. Are we good to
tell
go?
us about your beautiful work.
I appreciate the intro, David. Thank you, Janaea, for selecting my work. My voice might actually sound a little bit weird. I am getting over an upper respiratory infection, so trying to keep my voice going. But I do appreciate everybody's connection with their work and how, I guess, personal and spiritual it's all been. I'm starting to notice a trend with us artist folk. I grew up kind of not really understanding what home looked like, so my work is really centered around people's homes, people's dwelling spaces, their personal lives. I grew up in West Atlanta, Adamsville, if you guys are familiar, in the early 90s. And I didn't really have a biological family, so I got adopted. And most of like my life early on was like weird. I never had like family dinners, and then my parents never said I love you to each other or like hugged. It felt really detached, but I thought like that's what the world was. I thought sitcoms where, where you saw like families getting together was all fake. Because all my friends were from the group home down the street. So I would see them and we'd all get together, hang out, bounce from place to place, but all of us kind of were like a weird band of misfits. And like they were largely orphans or just kind of in the system. So when I grew up, I didn't really understand like how home worked, how houses worked. And then I became a father. And that was a weird culture shock for me because I'm sitting here like with no experience in how nurturing works or how, having a childhood really works. I'm like, okay, so now what? Now what do I do with this? Um, Later on, became a single father, full-time single father, raising my daughter completely by myself. And I'm like, all right, now it's time for me to really buckle down and show my daughter what home is. And I had no idea what that looked like. So I leaned on my friends. I started hanging out with them and I started to question why I felt more at home in their houses, in their spaces than I did in my own space. Kind of leaned in that and started making photographs with them. Did a lot of fashion work back in the day. So a lot of the early work that I did in this series, I leaned on the models that I worked with. And I would just hang out with them. And then from then, it became some of my friends. And then I started including complete strangers that I would meet in coffee shops who just had interesting things going on. And I would just get curious about what their lives looked like, how they parented, how they loved on each other, if they were in relationships, how they decorated stuff. All these things became indicative of what types of people, you might walk past every day, but they're human beings and they live very different lives than what they're showing on the surface. A lot of this work was influenced by cinema, and the directors that I would lean on were like people like Ari Aster or Gaspar Noé, Hype Williams. Um, and a lot of this, actually, all of this was shot on the same film stocks that they use to direct their films and translate those visions. And one of the reasons why I did that is, A, I'm colorblind. So I don't really see the world the way that other people do. I'm red-green deficient, so half the time I have no idea what I'm even looking at. So I just trust that my film is doing its job. The other reason is because when I'm in people's spaces, I don't want this to be about me. I I have 10 pictures on a roll of film, and I want my camera to kind of get out of my way so that I can have a discussion and kind of follow along in the lives of the people that I'm around. I never say take a picture. I think it's rude to take pictures or take from people. So I like to say I make pictures with people. Everyone that I photograph is very much a participant in the process. They're allowing me into their spaces. And as over the years, I started learning how people interact in their homes and how they build their lives and what they eat from day to day, how they interact with their roommates and all these different things, it became easier to accept home. Like back in the day, in my 20s, I wouldn't decorate, I wouldn't put anything up. I was just like, yo, this means nothing. I just need to come here, sleep, and then leave. Now, as of New Year's Eve, I'm married and I can smell the food that my wife is cooking downstairs. My daughter's doing homework in her room. Like it's this, complete 180 from what I grew up with. And now it kind of feels like I've got that sitcom Friday night afternoon, show relationship that I thought was all fake back in the day. And that all came from putting myself in the position to be in other people's homes and kind of explore the life that I wanted to build for myself. And I know I'm being really wordy. Hopefully I don't sound like a robot anymore, but I do appreciate the opportunity to share this with everybody.
I'm actually a bit curious in this like body of work. How did you come to meet these particular people? And it does look very cinematic. Yeah, it feels very, yeah, there's just a kind of aesthetic that draws you in. You feel like you are with these people in a way that's very respectful. And so I'm just curious about how you went about like embedding yourself with these folks.
It's a really natural process. I've gotten that question quite a few times, and it's honestly I just never really think about it. Like for instance, the woman here on the screen, Haley, who's jumping out of her window. I met her at a coffee shop, and she had a Sailor Moon tattoo on her leg. And my daughter's really into anime, and at the time I was like, oh my god, I have to make a picture of your tattoo. My daughter is going to flip. And we just kind of started talking. And over time, we would hang out. I would just spend time with people. My friend with the twin daughters, I've known her for years, and we would just hang out sometimes. She had just had the baby, so was over there helping her out. She was doing her single mom thing. And so she kind of leaned on me. It's like, okay, so how do I do these things as a parent? So I would just kind of hang out, and my camera is always with me. I think people are just used to seeing me with the camera. It just doesn't really, translate to them that this is a separate entity of me. It's like, oh, this is Q. He's got a camera. So, I'm very respectful of people's places. This is all just kind of a conversation I'm having with people, and pictures just kind of happen. I will say this one is the only one. My friend Bella here was the only one that was slightly staged. She was actually in her restroom, and I was like, man, I wish somebody was standing on the other side of this wall. And she called up a friend who she had just met in dance class. Like, she had literally just met him. And I was like, this is great. I love the contrast. Let's all hang out. We hung out for that evening. I went back probably 2 or 3 days later, and he was still there. He had not left. So I love the idea of, like, sometimes relationships happen in these pictures. Or I get to come back to people who I photographed 2 or 3 years ago, and their situation has completely changed. And I get to kind of, see their progression in life and see their wins and how happy they are, or, kind of help coach them through their situations.
Yeah, there's just so many characters in this body of work, and I feel like I want to know them all. And I think that's a big part of what drew me in, and also just aesthetically the interiors. It's like, oh, like I like these spaces, I want to be in these spaces. Like they're interesting, they're different, and the use of color for me was also like amazing. They almost look like film sets, when I was looking at it, I was like, yeah, this work draws me in for that reason.
Definitely appreciate that. And I'm glad to know that the colors are working out. So I always have my wife over my shoulder telling me what it is and what it isn't, because I will mess it up. We've been having a debate for the past several years about whether one of her dresses is gray or green. So here we are. I'm glad this works. I appreciate that.
Yeah. There was someone in the gallery today who was looking at your images, and they asked me, does the artist build these sets or does somebody else do them? And I was like, these aren't sets, these are actually people's homes. And he's like, wow. Uh, I appreciate that, like, the people that you work with, like, let you photograph their environments as is. It's like, it can be so frustrating when you're inside someone's environment trying to photograph and they're like, well, let me put this away, let me put this away. And like, I love that, like, this baby oil bottle is up here on the mantle, and it's like, it's these little clues and things that help inform who these people are and what their lives are about, that you can't get just from, like, a portrait when they're in isolation.
I'll say this, and I'll be quiet after this, but I do appreciate the idea that people can relate to little things in their pictures, because at the end of the day, as much as these are about the photo or about the people that are in the pictures, I really want these pictures to be about the viewer and how they connect with the images and the little things that they can say, oh man, I have that same spice in my cabinet, or oh, I know what that hug feels like, or that looks like my grandma's house. I really want that conversation to be at the forefront of these pictures. Because I mean, at the end of the day, there's 8 billion people on the planet. Nobody's alike, but there's something that tethers everybody together that makes everybody, just as human as the next person.
So thank you. So unfortunately, Suzanne is not with us tonight. Her work, I don't want to speak for her, but in just talking with her at the opening, a lot of her work is about her family and her relationship with her mother and her grandmother. And so these are staged photographs of the family. And I won't go any further than that to try to explain the work. her artist statement and things are available at her website. Our show, once portfolio comes down, the next show that's going up is Photo as Object. And this is the first time that we're going to be doing an exhibition which is mixed media. All of the works incorporate photography in some way or another, but there's going to be a lot of sculpture, there's going to be a lot of three-dimensional work, there's going to be installation, and so it's going to be a very, very different kind of show. And this particular artist is also going to be in that show, and she has a very interesting installation that we're going to have where since she's been in America, her mother's very, very worried about her. So to convince her mother that she was doing okay in America, she started texting her mother pictures of what she was eating that evening to show her mother that she was eating well. And after she'd been doing this for a couple of weeks, her mother started texting her photographs of what she was eating. And so she has this installation, which is a table with a tablecloth that's actually a photograph that's over the entire tablecloth. And there's a backdrop that hangs behind the whole thing of 400 images that they have exchanged between the two of them. And then on either end of the table is a laptop with video of the artist is on one end and her mother's on the other, and it's just video of them eating. So it's going to be very, very interesting. I can't wait to see it. So with that brings us to like the Q&A portion for any questions that may not have been answered. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point. And I'm going to open up the floor. If you would like to, if you have any questions for anybody, please just unmute yourself and take it from there. If you're uncomfortable asking a question, you can always put it into chat and I can ask it on your behalf, either way.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. Kind of want to piggyback on something that Elena mentioned in her work, and we talked about this kind of briefly at the gallery. But I genuinely appreciate the idea of, I guess, breaking down the barriers of what is art, especially as it comes to color and culture. As I photographed a lot of models over the years who, especially Black women, who, when I show them photographs of my inspirations through people like, Richard Avedon or Helmut Newton, or, there's ongoing conversation that Annie Leibovitz has no idea how to photograph Black women. There's this thing that women don't see themselves, or Black women don't see themselves as art or in museums. And I think that the work that you are doing is so important, especially, I'm saying that as a girl dad as well, trying to make sure that my daughter can see herself in the museums that we go to and galleries and things like that. I think what you are doing is infinitely important, and I hope that you keep doing it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I feel like coming into exhibiting this work, I was kind of in a position where I'm like, is this stuff something that would be exhibited in a museum? Does it fit that aesthetic of what photography is or what art is? But I don't know, I guess just in telling my story and telling the stories of so many women like me, especially exploring the taboos of it, it's just like, this is art. This is what it is. And why not?
Yeah, I was very glad to see it. And, I also just kind of want to say that it instantly jumped out to me as I was like, this is beautiful, this is good work. And also something that I was thrilled to see in a gallery space precisely for that reason. Like, it should be there. And it should also be in conversation with other people's work that's, has different, that, is about different things. Because I also think sometimes that work of this nature gets isolated from larger conversations about photography. And that's really important to make sure that doesn't happen, and that it's in conversation with all of these other works. So yeah, super thrilled to have it and to have this group together in conversation and have the works together in conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And thank you for jurying curating this show as well. Like it was super exciting to be able to work with someone from Aperture for this. Like this is insane.
You're welcome. I'm very, very happy to do it. And I was saying before that like working and seeing photography coming out of Atlanta, it's like I see a bunch of photography all the time. And I'm like, this photography is very fresh. It's amazing. It's really interesting. And I feel privileged actually to have been able to do it and to have been able to see all of this work and see you guys. So very much appreciate it. It gave me inspiration. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, there were over 100 artists that submitted work for this show. So to get it down to 8 people, is no easy task because each person that submitted was submitting between 10 to 20 images. So there's a lot of work to go through. And this particular call for entry gets so much interest globally because of the connection to the High Museum and the opportunity to get included in their permanent collection. That for many years, oh, good. It looks like Shuyan is joining us. Good. That for many years we've had exhibitions that featured no Atlanta artists or anybody from Georgia. It was all out of state people. And so in this year's exhibition, we have 5 artists from the state of Georgia. And this was nothing, I didn't ask for this. I gave no direction on how things should be chosen, except it has to be 8 people, 6 works each. And so it's thrilled to see, the level of work that's coming out locally. It's one of the things I'm very, very excited about in the 2 years that I've been the ED over at APG is that we have a lot of new voices coming in from a lot of different communities, and it's exciting to see the breadth of the work and the subjects that people are tackling and the unique voices which are emerging. It's really it's a great position for me to be in to get to just hang out and meet all these people and be around this work all the time. And so I'm going to bring my screen back up because we have one last person whose work we need to talk about. Let me share again and bring us back to the beginning of that. So we're so glad you made it into the call, and it's your turn to talk about your work. Are you connected into the audio?
Hi everyone. Sorry I
Great.
cannot turn on my video. I had some school stuff, so I'm like in a pretty crowded space. I'm really sorry about that. Because it's like the install week for our thesis exhibition. So everybody is like prowling in our gallery. So hi everyone, my name is Shuyuan Zhou, and I'm currently an MFA student at School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And this group of work titled My Great Grandmother, My Grand Aunt, My Grandmother, My Mother, and I shot the series of photos in 2022. And I actually told the story for 20 times at the opening. The story starts with my mother. After she was born, her mother wanted to drown her in the bathtub, but they didn't manage to kill her, so she was sent to her grand aunt's family to become a child bride for her cousins. And at the age of 10, they found that close relatives cannot get married, so she was mercilessly sent back to her biological parents' family. And after 2 years of her birth, they gave birth to another daughter and they strangled her to death right after her birth. And then after 8 years of her birth, they finally give birth to the second son in the family, who is also who is also my younger uncle. I always know like this story, like this tragic story, which happened to my mom. My mom always get teary-eyed every time when she talks about the story. But it was until when I was in like my last year of my undergrad, I decided to make an artwork on this. So I went back to my home hometown in the small village where my mom grew up in the rural area. And I started with field research. I spent 2 months on the field research. I talked to the villagers. I went to all the the shrines in the village, like the remainings in the village. And then I found out that all the women in the family were victims of the patriarchal society. So my mother's biological mother, um, her mother couldn't give birth to a second son in the family due to health condition. So she was given a boy's name and she was treated like a son in the family. And then my cousins always call her the second grandpa, 二爷 in our dialect. I feel like that's why when she got married, she wanted a second son so desperately. And my grand aunt, I always wondered that why she wanted my mom to become a child bride of her, in her family. And then I noticed that she is also a child bride. She was brought into the family after 15 days of her birth, and she never got she never got the chance to see her biological parents after that. I actually had very, very long conversation with her, and she told me that when she was 3 or 4 years old, she found out that she was not she was not like a biological daughter in the family. So she walked to her biological family's her biological family's house and wanted to see her biological parents, but they just shut the door. She was 3 or 4 at the time, and she never got the chance to see her biological parents. And she told me that she will hate them for the rest of her life. And I remember that when before I was taking the photos, I told all the female elders in my family that I want to take portraits of them, but most of them rejected. They rejected partly was because they were not comfortable in front of the camera because they've never taken official photos in their life. And also because my grand aunt told me that she felt she is nobody, so she's not important at all. She told me that if you quote unquote if you use your camera to shoot portraits of me, your work will be such a failure because nobody would care about me and my life. And remember that there is a photo in this series that my grandmother actually holds a red prize. So that was the very first time I learned her name because we always use men's name to represent her. And on the prize, I remember it was given by the Chinese government. They call her the raw model of filial piety, which means that she did a great job taking care of the old and taking care of the old and the young in the family. So I feel like it's very ironic that after she fulfilled all the tasks that the patriarchal society has given to her, and then she got her name back as a prize. So yeah, that was the process of me creating this body of work. And I persuaded my grand aunt that I will take her portrait to the States and put her portrait up on gallery walls. And it was actually not really kidding, but I didn't think that it would really happen. So I'm really, really honored that this group of work was chosen and was really on a gallery wall. And I'm really excited to tell her about this. I just sent her all the photos of the installation in the gallery. And thank you.
Thank you. Before you got on the call, I was telling them about your work that's going to be in the next show for Photo as Object, the installation about you and your mother.
Yeah, I had a lot of work on intergenerational relationships. I actually just got back from the framing shop, the local frame shop that I sent the picture to frame. For that work, it was basically about the intergenerational dialogue between me and my mother, but with food. Because me and my mother, we had a lot of intergenerational trauma going on because as you can see, the way her mother treated her was not really nice. She actually she actually prevented her from going like continuing her education when she was in high school. So they kind of like cut their relationship right there. And my mom ended up going to college and studied chemistry. But I think they started to talk to each other after my mother's marriage. So in that case, I feel like my mom didn't really know how to be a good mother because she doesn't have a good model. And we had a lot of like traumas going on. It was until like when I was doing this project and when I was talking to her, I noticed that a lot of like those really bad words coming from her mouth was actually coming from her mother. So I was thinking of this intergenerational trauma. It's like haunting the the females, and this kind of like patriarchal ghost, this like cycle happen in the family. So I feel like if I only have like one chance to make artwork, then this is it.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing again. And in the chat, I've lost it now. Okay. We had a question in the chat. Let me get back down to it. So this was a question for Dr. Clark. Is he still here?
I am. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. There you are. Okay, thanks,
Yeah, let
boys.
me read the question. Sorry, I didn't.
It was, what was the purpose of using Black people as the backdrop with newspapers? It's as if the Black people are object in the mind of a white person.
I don't certainly see it as Black people being the backdrop for anything. It was using the newspaper to add additional context, contrast. It's one of the gentlemen that I photographed was potentially experiencing food insecurity. So his picture is printed on the page that has some lifestyle recipes and what's the best miso of the season. These are not things that are concerning people, with the thought that this is going to hopefully draw attention to people that are living on the fringe of poverty. Is this Hilsa? Did that answer your question?
No, I mean, it's if you're trying to, in a way, project Black people in some kind of, I don't know how to explain it without being, raunchy, but in my opinion, it's just the way you're portraying Black people as objects and not as people, and explaining, the way you're trying to, the chemistry of the photography and the paper. I'm trying to figure out how you're relating that to Black people. What are you trying to say? I'm just trying to come from, because most people that I hang around with will look at that and say, what is he trying to say? It's almost insulting.
Well, it's certainly not intended to be. I don't know if you were here when I was talking about these are images that I took as a 19-year-old of people living in the Mississippi Delta. When I reprinted them onto these newspapers, it was for the purpose of adding additional context to those images and contrast to them. And it's more intended to be storytelling than to make any kind of cultural reference, if that's what you're asking me.
I hate to say this, anything that Black people are in photographs or media, it's always going to be political. And coming from a white guy, you're going to get some feedback.
I appreciate the feedback, Hilsa.
Yeah, because this is an interesting question that kind of comes up that we have a lot of conversations about, and that is using imagery that potentially tells the story of people outside of a community, or being in a community that you may not be part of. And you shot these images years ago. How old did you say you were? 19 when you photographed
That's
the
right.
people there? So, and you're a couple of years older than 19 now, right? So this is
barely.
yeah, I think it's definitely deserving of a broader conversation.
And I would
But
just add as I was just gonna say, I would just add as well, like for me, from my perspective, that's a fundamental question in photography. So I study the ethics of representation. And to me, sometimes work is both and. So sometimes you can have work that raises certain kinds of questions about representation or about who's, taking the photograph and what position they're in. And sometimes also part of the point of the work is to not just enjoy the work, but to also raise those kinds of questions. So yeah, for me, immediately I was interested in the work for because of its aesthetics, also the story it was trying to tell. And I think it's interesting to kind of bring up, okay, with photography, specifically photography, because bringing up kind of the idea that we spoke about before, which is like, should we say take a photograph? Should what does that exactly mean? But I think it's a healthy and good conversation to have, especially when you have these works in conversation with other works. So
And Dr. Johnson, I'm sure you're familiar with the writings of Alan Sekula, who wrote about, who has agency to take photos. And it's definitely something that's, I've spoken with to other people before submitting this work and before my recent show, because he writes that it's important to involve the subject with your imagery. And I believe it was Quintavious who spoke about that as well, and wanting to involve people and not just walk up and take people's images, which I think was the verb that was also discussed. So it's the concern of being tone deaf with this is certainly not wasted on me, and certainly very much open to a conversation about it, and by no means was intending to be offensive or offend anyone. So
yeah, and today in the gallery there was a woman named Rosita who came in, who pops in occasionally, and she was visibly moved when in looking at the images today. And when I was asking her about, what it was she was experiencing, she just said, it's my family. This is my family. She said, I'm just not used to seeing, necessarily, like, she said, it's just my family. And she was very, very moved. And she didn't ask anything about who created the images. She was just very struck by the images themselves. And then, of course, she was fascinated by the technique. So I think, you know, uh, different people have different experiences of the art as they're experiencing it. But I think conversations like what you're raising, Hilso, and what we've just been discussing here, I think these conversations are incredibly important. Things change over time. Like there was stuff that was done in street photography in the 50s and 60s that we would never think about doing now. So things change. And I think that's why having uh, not only being members of APG and submitting work for exhibition, but participating in opportunities to have conversations with other photographers to develop community so that we can discuss these things together and learn from each other and explore these ideas. I think it's important that people are, having dialogue with each other. So thank you for the question, and thank you for everyone's responses. Are there any other questions we'd like to ask before we wrap up? And I appreciate you like hanging out a little bit longer than we had originally planned for tonight. So thank you. Any other questions? Any burning desires we have? Okay, well, with that, I would just like to say, um, the exhibition's up until May 15th. If you haven't seen it yet, please come by and check it out. It's a great show. And thank you so much again for your work on this show and for being with us tonight and sharing your thoughts. And thank you for all of the artists that are here tonight and talking about your work and to allow us to exhibit your work. And for everyone that just dialed in just to hear the talk, thank you for being here tonight. And I look forward to seeing more from all of you. Please keep submitting. And yeah, so enjoy the rest of your evening and thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.